I love Mama Africa. Anthony B, Anthony B. Say, love Mama Africa, love Mama Africa, love Mama Africa. It is the home of our ancestors. I need some African love. I need some African love. I need some African love. Yeah, yeah. I need some African love. I need some African love. I need some African love. African love. Africa is a land of home. Time for march out around. Remember the takers across the sea, chain bound for slavery. I can't forget where I'm from. Yaga, yaga. So let's think back on the blood of the ancestor. Emancipate like a Robert Nesta. And them build the city of London, city of Paris, and the one of Manchester. Time to stand up and show where you take for. If it no work, if it no work, it for. I got no time to sit down and a wheels. No time to skylark and a jester. Africa wait is creator. Marcus Garvey say no, we're no greater. And when the youth them need a leader, them a look to them elder. So I need some African love. I need some African love. I need some African love. Some African love, I need some African love, I need some African love. I love Africa night and day. I don't matter what you are say. Anytime you can't find me, you're African day. So I not listen to nobody. Tell my son him say no daddy. We don't in a no lulali.
Keep living Muslim on way.
Remember from your black, you are African. No matter how you see Babylon, I love Africa from the day man born. Yeah. So I've been dreaming of emancipation. I've been dreaming of repatriation. I've been dreaming of a reparation so I can seek redemption. So, yaga, yaga, yo. I need some African love. 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 I love from Africa. Africa is a cradle of civilization. It's the place where our life began. Show your love for Africa. Remember Africa. Look at your history. Don't let it be a mystery. Africa, 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 Africa is the African home and abroad, international and locally.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of y'all and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button because the message is more important than the messages. So the music came through clearly. And I think it's going to be pretty clear as to what I'm not going to be saying on this one. So if you're still tuned in, it is because you want to hear what I will be saying. I know it's late at night in most of the states, but if you're awake, go ahead and hit that share button. Somebody else needs to hear this too. A few weeks ago, it was probably 2.5 weeks ago or 3.5 weeks ago, I went into a restaurant down the street from where I live. You guys know me. Some people would say, oh, Black man's really proud to be Black. Well, I can't even call it pride. I'm appreciative. I'm grateful to be Black. It's not something that I worked to earn. I was born this way, been this way all my life. And I'm grateful for it. But the gratitude for it came about when I began to learn more about what is not put on TV, and certainly what was not put on TV when I was a kid. As a kid, I loved the Tarzan movies because I love nature, not for any racial reasons or reasons of race disloyalty. I loved the Tarzan movies because I was a kid that liked jungles and forests, and I liked to swim. And like anyone else, I like to run around and play in the summertime with nothing but shorts on. So it sort of seemed to me like I was watching this guy on a permanent summer vacation. That's what I liked about it. But we know what was not put into the Tarzan movies. And the Tarzan movies are very important for us to understand because even a lot of you younger cats who, let's say in your 30s and under, didn't grow up seeing the old Tarzan movies that my age group came up seeing. When I was coming up, and you had a few channels on cable, but when I was growing up, the Tarzan movies came on every afternoon during the summers, and then they came on every Saturday afternoon during the school year. And I'm talking the old 1960s Tarzan movies. Some even from the 30s and 40s. You didn't know which one was going to come on. You just, cartoons went off, and then the next thing to come on was Tarzan. And that's how that worked. And you know what was not on there? Civilizations were not on there. They were always depicted as the savages running around. And I mean, pretty much all of Africa was depicted as one big jungle and some village with backward savages in it, and maybe a landing strip for planes for the colonial masters to fly in and start exploring or something. That was the Tarzan movies. When I began to learn about what was not in these movies, then I became even more appreciative. I was appreciative in fourth grade. And the movie Shaka Zulu somewhat helped, somewhat. That long, forever movie. God, how many hours was that movie? But that somewhat helped because my parents said, you're not going to see much on television. But the way that we were shown in the Tarzan movies is obviously not true. And so this is at that point. And then fast forward to being 13 years old and reading about Malcolm X. And I said, okay, so there was a lot more that's been kept from us. So I've been appreciative. I can't sit up and say that I'm necessarily proud, but more so appreciative. It's like an extra gift God just gives you. You know, he gives everybody a gift. So he created me directly from the original ancestry of mankind. I never felt superior, and I never felt inferior. And a lot of you, when you really sit and think about this, consciously, you haven't either. Inferiority or superiority complexes are usually subconscious in anybody. So I went ahead and where I lived on the Gulf Coast, there weren't that many. There weren't that many people from the continent. We would have had to take a drive to New Orleans to meet many of them, or Houston. And New Orleans was far enough, but then they have to keep on going through to get to Houston with something else. And so I really didn't get to meet a lot of people directly from the continent. That changed when I left my hometown and went to Atlanta. And as you know, Atlanta is not only an international city, it is a Black international city. And that's when I began to meet people from the Caribbean and from the continent. And I finally got a chance to ask directly how they felt. What it was like. I got to ask the dumb questions, but I would tell them, listen, feel free to ask any dumb questions about my home region too. Some would say, oh, okay, well, did you canoe through the swamps to get to school? And I would say, yeah, we did when it would flood, that's all. So, we had our little jokes with each other, but they really were just jokes. And I remember when I bumped into some Liberians at my college, and they had Nigerian first names, specifically Yoruba. But they were Liberians that were Americo-Liberian and non-returnee Liberians who had never left and gone back to the continent. But they had Nigerian Yoruba names. Peace, I'm listening to what's happening. And so that's when I really started to get homesick, like truly homesick. Not just when the weather would get cold and I'd say, man, I wish I lived somewhere tropical. No, I started to actually get homesick when I met them. Went to some of their parties. And while Louisiana is famous for a particular type of cuisine, that sort of cuisine is actually pretty common throughout the entire Gulf Coast. And so I remember the first party I went to, and when they brought out the food, I said, oh my God. That's what we were trying to make when we would make jambalaya. This is what we've been trying to come up with when we were coming up with gumbo. Now, this ain't just about me and my little personal experience, gentlemen. I'm saying this because there are many of you that have gone through this, especially if you've been in larger cities and you get to meet Black folks from different places. If you really spend time with them, you find out what we have in common. And I understood this not just from these Liberians, because some of them were descendants of African Americans that had gone back home, and some were not. They themselves were a mix. I spent time with people from Ethiopia as well when I was living in Atlanta. Learned a third of their language. Went to the Orthodox Church to see if they were going to worship white Jesus. I found a lot of things we had in common, both good and bad. Same in the Caribbean. A lot of things we had in common, both good and bad. When you talk about pro-Black, one of the reasons I said it don't get no pro-Blacker than me, or rather my family, was because actually I began to spend more time with people from the continent than my parents wanted me to. They thought I was going to forget that I'm an African American. How am I going to forget that? I knew more about what it meant to be African American from spending time with African Americans, African Caribbean people, and continental Africans than if I'd only hung out with African Americans, because there are a lot of things that we got from back home. And we don't know where they come from. We thought that pouring out a little for the homies that ain't here was something that started in California. It didn't start in California. That's a West African custom. I don't do that anymore as a Muslim, but I'm saying that the custom came from back home. That's what I'm getting at. Even some of the foods that we love. Did you all know that okra is not an American crop? It's an African crop. How many were aware of that? And that's the basis, it's one of the bases for gumbo. Oh yeah, we know Creoles are African Americans. Some would beg to differ, but I mean, they've been considered African Americans for a while. And I know there are those listening to Golden Sphere that would say, no, we're not. Well, it depends on which one you ask. That's what I'm getting at. But they've been considered a subset of the African American population. So their African origin is not in question. But the Cajuns are the Caucasians, and they're eating African cuisine to a certain extent. Yeah. See, the fact is, even in Colombia, they have a saying. In Colombia, one of their sayings is, there is no Colombian history without Africa, but there was Africa before there was Colombia. Now, if I was an original American from the region that's now Colombia, I might feel slighted by that because they did have their history. But see, that's the history of those particular ethnic groups. And the Colombians don't mean that they had no history. What they mean is that the nation of Colombia, as a nation today, as a republic, does not have a history without Africa. Even as a Spanish colony, it had no history without Africa. You know, Pensive, that is true. African Americans who went back there did a number, and then others didn't do a number. They really were a mixed bag, but of course, the ones who do damage are the ones that wind up getting the attention, because it takes less time to damage than to build. That is very true. Nowadays, especially on the coast, they're so mixed that nobody's 100% Americo-Liberian, nor 100% from any particular tribe. Near the coast, I mean. In the interior, you may find someone that's 100% Loma or 100% Vai or 100% Gola, but even then they've been marrying each other for a while. Yeah, what they did there was pretty up fuck. But the Civil War broke out because of the backlash when the pendulum swung too far the other way. And that was what was messed up about it. We seem to be a race overwhelmed by its own diversity. And to a certain extent, that could make sense because we've not historically thought of ourselves as a race. We've been forced to when we come into contact with other races, not nationalities, races. Anyway, moving on. A few weeks ago, as I was starting to say, I went to a restaurant down the street from where I live. When I went down the street into this restaurant, I saw some gentlemen, and I knew they were from Nigeria as soon as I saw their clothing and their hats. I could tell that not only were they Nigerian, they were from the north. And some of what they were speaking was pidgin, and then some of it was another language. I later learned which language it was. And in all honesty, I didn't say anything to them because we didn't know each other. But over here, there is a custom that the local Arabs have. And hospitality is one of their strong suits here. Sometimes when they realize that you're from somewhere else, then they may just cover your bill at the restaurant and you don't know until it's over, till you get ready to settle up and they say, no, somebody already covered it. Somebody paid it. He left. That happens sometimes. And I figured, well, I don't know if anybody's going to do this for them. I'm not sure, but let me at least try. So I went to one of the employees and I said, listen, how much is the tab of the table behind me? Don't be obvious. Don't look. What's the tab? And he said to me, it's paid. Oh, really? They paid everything. And he said, before them. Now, mind you, the guy was speaking broken Arabic because the employee was not from an Arabic-speaking country. So with the broken Arabic, I had to try to put together what he was saying. But I went ahead and then paid for my order, which was a to-go order, and then I left. About a week and a half later, I went to pray at the mosque behind my apartment. And I saw a man with a hat on. And then I saw his son with his hat on because it was cold that day. To be honest with you, I really couldn't tell if they were from Africa or if they were from Bangladesh because the shades are the same oftentimes, but I didn't see their hair and I didn't hear him speak a particular language. He had facial hair, but his facial hair actually was about as straight as mine. All he had was a goatee. He didn't have a full beard, so I couldn't even gather the texture of his hair through that. So I wasn't sure if I was looking at one of us or not. I'm cool with people from Bangladesh. A lot of locals, man, I like them, but I'm all right with them because they actually don't have many biases, to be honest with you, and not that biased other people. You think, oh, well, that's right next to India. They must hate black folks. No, people from Bangladesh aren't like that. People from northern India and Pakistan tend to be. But I don't speak Bengali, so I didn't speak to the man. I didn't bother him. Just saw him and his son, and that was it. Next day, I went back. I saw them again. Realized I wasn't going to be able to gauge the man's hair texture and know his race because he was bald-headed just like me. So I wasn't going to be able to figure it out. But then I figured, okay, no, wait a minute. I got a better look at him. I said, okay, that's one of us. I didn't know if he was a citizen or not. But when the prayer was done, we saw each other again. We wound up facing each other accidentally, and we gave each other the nod. And he smiled, and I said, yep. That's one of us. That's a shine. Because he threw his head back up. And that's something that even the bronze Arabs will do that. But the people from the subcontinent don't. And then one of the citizens spoke to him because he's new in the area and said something about, did you just move here or are you our new neighbor? Something to that effect. And the man answered back in English 2 weeks. He didn't answer the man in Arabic. I realized, okay, so he may not be from here. I apologized for interrupting and I said to the man, listen, did you just answer him in English? And I asked him in English and he said, yeah. And I said, okay, are you from an English speaking country? And he said, yeah, I'm from Nigeria, from Zamfara State. So we hit it off, and I explained to the Arab man that was speaking to him, the citizen, that he didn't speak Arabic. It was only English so far. And that he had just moved in. I told the citizen what he told me in English, which is he had just moved in about 2 weeks before that. And this was about a week ago. He and I hit it off. So I said, well, listen, on Friday, because Friday's the weekend, I said, on Friday, lunch is on me because you're new. And I'll show you the city as much as I can. I mean, I'm not a citizen, but I'll show you the city as much as I can. Now, I realize this is a long story, but I'm going somewhere with this. We hit it off. Friday came after the prayer. I went to the same restaurant. While I was waiting on him to show up with his boys, one of his partners arrived in a separate car early, but I saw my friend's son with his friend. So that means that his son rode in a car with his friend. And when that man saw me, he recognized me, threw his head up, walked up, shook my hand, said, "Salam alaikum. Are you the one that paid for us a few weeks ago?" I said to him, "No, when I tried, apparently somebody beat me to the punch." That's the hospitality here. I was too late, actually, from what I could gather. But I was going to do a recording about this the day that I first saw them sitting at the table, but the new guy was not there. But then the rest of them showed up, including the new fella, my new friend. I'm probably going to see him in a few hours from now. They came in another car. And the one that showed up first, he said, "Gentlemen, I think he's the one that paid for our meal a few weeks ago." I told him, "Sir, they told me that it was already paid." And he said to me, "Well, see," and he pointed at the new guy and he said, "He may have just gotten here, but we've been here for a while." That might happen sometimes. But truth be told, the only time this happened was the day that you walked in, took an order to go, and walked out. I didn't even know he had seen me. I thought I was invisible to them. I guess because I was wearing jeans, I did stand out to them. So we all got to chopping it up, and I learned something. Now, mind you, they're from Nigeria. And let's be honest, all this ADOS, non-ADOS grief and grudge and beef. That's why I call it grief, because it's a grudge and a beef. And it's saddening. All of this is coming from largely that nationality. Same passports as them. But we chopped it up. We were eating together and we were cracking jokes. I mean, mind you, remember, Nigeria's an English-speaking country. And we talked about the Hausa language. And this is the funny thing. This is important. I want you guys to pay attention to this. The men I was sitting with all spoke Hausa, but they were not Hausa. They were Fulani, but they were Hausa speakers. The newest one, the one I met at the mosque, praying behind my apartment, is a Fulani, doesn't even speak Fulani. He never learned it. He's a Fulani, married to a Fulani who speaks English and Hausa. And I think there's a third language he speaks, and he's trying to learn Arabic now. I told him I would teach him the basics, the beginning, but I'm not an expert. And that after that point, he was going to have to learn from somebody that's fluently bilingual. I might be at about 60 or 70%. And so I can get him off to a good start, and I can make sure that they don't teach him the broken Arabic that they use to communicate with people from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. Because they'll teach you that, it'll be wrong, and you'll think it's correct. And you the whole time you sound like a caveman. I know, buy a ticket, that type of thing. You be talking broken and won't even know it. So I told them, I'll make sure they don't teach you that. Then after that, but the thing is, what I saw here was that it's not as simplistic as the tribalism we've been told. They've been told that we don't do anything. We just sit around and complain and do nothing. But here they meet me teaching English as a foreign language. We talked about history because I had to teach history when I was living in the States. That means I had to study it. We were chopping it up about history. So all of the stereotypes were going out the window. They welcomed me as another African. I didn't hide that I was African American. Of course I didn't hide that. But what I'm getting at here is that they saw exactly several things. Yes, I'm from the States. I got a Southern American accent. Yeah, I'm from African origin. Yes, I'm aware that at least on my mother's side, the Fulani and the Hausa are some of my ancestor tribes. So too are the Wolof and the Bambara and the Mandinka and the Serer and the Soninke. That's on my mother's side, whom we know about because of how the French went in and took people. My dad's side, we're not sure. We suspect it's probably the Congo. But they knew, and I made this plain. Mind you, they come from one tribe. They speak another tribe's language because these tribes have intermarried for so long that they don't even speak the language of the tribe from which they come. And I even said, now, is there any guarantee that any of you are 100% anything? And they said, no, chances are we are Hausa because our dads are Hausa. A lot of times our mothers are too. They're the majority. I mean, I'm sorry, they were saying they were Fulani because they came from Fulani fathers. But they're going back mom or dad's side, there was bound to be Hausa and Fulani ancestry. They said it's a guarantee. You just trace it patrilineal. Assalamu alaikum, Abdullah. What's going on, man? So mind you, Nigeria itself is so diverse. Last night I was chopping it up with the new fella here. We'll just use the name Muhammad since that's common. We'll give him that alias. Chopping it up with him yesterday evening. It was cold too last night. And he said to me that there are a lot of people who come from non-Hausa tribes that now speak Hausa, even though they come from other tribes. Hausas replaced their languages because Hausa became the lingua franca for them. And here we are thinking that all the tribes hate each other and they never learn anything from each other and they never influence each other. They're intermarrying over there. And some people want to tell me, well, you know, Black, you come with that Arab religion. Man, let me tell y'all something else. Most Black international, intercultural, and intertribal and interlingual marriages are between the Muslims. I'm married to a woman from the opposite side of the continent from my own ancestry. We straight. I'm happy. I'm not going to say too much for privacy reasons, but we happy. I'm a Creole coming from the Gulf Coast of the United States. And I married her and find that we got cultural similarities, even to the way that they tie their hair. They got customs that elderly Creole women have that the younger modern day Creole women don't have, but she's got them. Minus the voodoo, alhamdulillah. We're going to have some discussions with Black folks of different nationalities. Truth be told, we're going to wind up having to have some serious discussions even with Black folks of the same nationality, because even amongst us ADOS, even amongst FBA, African Americans, there are things that change from region to region. Do you think that coming from the conservative Gulf Coast of the 1990s and moving to Atlanta and running into bros from New York and New Jersey, that we were okay with them calling each other God? Do you think we were fine with that? We come from these Baptist or maybe Catholic churches out the Gulf Coast, go to Atlanta for school, and then here's a shine from New York with some Timbs on. Strange accent. That's not the problem. Hey, yo, what up, God? Peace, God? You think we're okay with that? We're going to have some of these conversations between ourselves. How are we going to sit up here and say that we're not going to have some tough conversations with others? But the thing that is also key to understand is that Nigeria is similar. Understand that. It's not as big a nation as the U.S. single-handedly, but its land area is a bigger percentage of the United States land area than what we would think. Some parts of the north actually get cold in the winter at night. It's in the tropics. But some of the north, sometimes at night during the winter months here, gets cold. And they ain't that far from the equator. That's the size of it. But in the south, you wouldn't find it. And that leads me to something else. See, much of what we've been arguing about doesn't even come from arguments that were raised by the Hausa or the Fulani in the north, or the tribes living next to them and with them in the north. It doesn't even come from people living in Jos, which is the capital of Plateau State, which is in the middle of the country. Even that's not where a lot of this comes from. Even people that live on the border with Cameroon, around the ADOS state area, are not the ones that are causing this trouble and this division. I've stated this before. You got a specific cultural group coming out of a specific city, Lagos, that are responsible for most of this. That's why we recognize the names as being Nigerian in many cases. I can't even pin this on the Yoruba. I can't pin this on them. It's another cultural group. They have heavy influence in African culture, by the way. Culturally speaking, they and the Yoruba are very closely related to African Americans, culturally speaking, and even in other parts of the Americas. A big influence on Haitian culture, believe it or not. But yet and still, that's one cultural group that loves to sit around and call us all sorts of names. And what many of you don't know is that they'll sit up and call the Yoruba all kinds of names if there's no Yoruba around. And don't get me started on what they would say about the Fulani or the Hausa or any other people that live up in the north. They'll talk trash about anybody. And even though they've got a similar name to the ethnic group, they're not Edo with a D, and they will talk bad about the Edo if nobody's around. Everyone knows this about them. You ask some of them in private, and they themselves will tell you, oh yes, we think we're cleverer than everybody else. We look at everybody else as a bunch of fools. One-on-one, I'm not telling you to judge them without getting to know them as individuals, but I am here to tell you that it is not even most of the cultural groups in Nigeria that are responsible for this ADOS, non-ADOS fight. That's what I'm trying to explain to you all. The Ghanaian did not start this. The Liberian, American Liberian or non-Americo-Liberian did not start this. The African American did not start this. The Jamaican did not start this. The Bayesian did not start this. The Trinidadian, the Belizean, the Guyanese did not start this. The Togolese, the Beninese, the Cameroonian didn't start this. The Sierra Leonean did not start this. The Gambian did not start this. As a matter of fact, to be honest with you, it wasn't even the Nigerian that started it. See, the Liberians told me back in the 90s when I was in college, sitting in the cafeteria with them chopping it up, because they had moved to Houston, which is, Gulf Coast. And the Gulf Coast is actually very African. Matter of fact, in August of 2005, CNN did a study and found that New Orleans was the most African city in the United States based on a combination of two things no other city had. One, a black population, and two, African culture or African customs that were retained. Charleston would have won, but we're not the majority there. Cleveland would have won by population, or maybe Atlanta, but a lot of the African customs were not really retained. New Orleans was very unique in that regard, and that African customs were retained unknowingly, and the population was still majority of African origin. But what that got to do with us now today? Well, of course, shortly after that, August, that was actually, y'all already know. The end of August and the beginning of September was when the levees all of a sudden couldn't hold back the storm surge anymore. And the place flooded, and it's never been the same since. But when we were chopping it up in the cafeteria in college, the Liberians and me, they told me something that was interesting. And this is why it is that even though I can't say that I'm pro-black, I'm more pro-black male nowadays. This is part of why it is that I don't let white society off the hook. No matter how much I'm willing to give a chance to any individual to be fair, I don't let them off the hook. And I don't appreciate when some of you do that. Stop talking about whitey. No, shuck that fit. I'm finna talk about them. They told me that when they were kids, there was some missionaries that were teaching at their schools. These missionaries weren't even white Americans. They were from Scandinavia, I think. No, I'm sorry. These were nuns. They were missionary nuns. That's what it was. And they told me that these ladies sat up and told them that if you ever go to America, and these ladies weren't even from America, they told them if you ever go to America, watch out for the Negroes. And they were saying this in Liberia, which was started as a republic by the same people against whom these nuns, not from America, were warning these little kids. They told me this. They said they got there and found that while African Americans would kind of look at them strangely when they spoke, they would give them a chance, and after a while, things were cool. And they would wind up influencing each other. Like me. They said that when they drove through Louisiana and they stopped at some restaurant, because they had to go from Houston to Atlanta. So they drove through Louisiana, stopped at some restaurant, and they said that the food that the Wyatts were eating was similar to African food. Matter of fact, I think that's when they invited me to my first Liberian party in Atlanta. I went and oh my God, I saw it. It was plain as day. I said, yep, they are us and we are them. It was like looking at how we used to be back in the 80s before it became cool to be a thug in the 90s. That's what it was like looking at us. And they were coming from a war-torn country. So anyway, they told me how this idea was put into their head. But when they got to the States, they saw it was different. Years later, when I met my first wife, African-American, her mother, I still call her mother-in-law, her mother, very Pan-African, very pro-black, more so than her daughter was, had been to Ghana before her daughter was born. And she said it was like visiting the American South because she used to visit the Carolinas where her people were from in the summers. She was Northern African American, but of course, we come from the South. I would think the same thing, Slice of Hell, but I'm not sure how much that still continues to this day. But at that time, I think so. Because for one, we were having a conversation in the 90s. So the time that they would have been told this stuff would have been about the early 80s. Maybe even the late 70s, because some of them were older than me. But see, here's the thing, Slice of Hell. My mother-in-law, going back to her, she went to Ghana when Ghana was a fairly newly independent country. I think she went in the late 60s or early 70s. It was before her daughter was born, before I was born. And she was connecting, and they came to her. When some of them heard her accent, they came to her and they said, "Are you from the States?" And she said, "Yeah." And they were like, "Welcome home." But in the conversations, some of them asked her in a restaurant, they said, "Is it true that you all take pictures of Africans and play darts with them in the bars?" And she said, "Who the hell told you that?" And they said, "The British told them that." So she told the same thing to me years later. She didn't know the Liberians that I knew, and the Liberians never met my mother-in-law from the States. These are two different time frames. They didn't meet each other, but telling me the same thing. Now, my mother-in-law, she said to them, she explained to them, number one, black folks don't play darts. Number two, if we just put up faces of African people, we may or may not be able to tell the difference between them and us. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't tell. She told them, being here in Ghana, I've seen many of you that look exactly like someone back in the States. So you can't always tell. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So it's too much of a gamble if we were going to do it. We could sit up here and be playing darts using pictures of our own aunts. How that's going to work? Next. See, that's not all. When I taught at a private Muslim school, there was a Tunisian teacher. And she told me the same thing. She said that when she got the visa, there was a follow-up appointment. She was approved for the visa, I should say. But there was a follow-up appointment at the U.S. Embassy there in Tunis. So she had to go for that. And that's when she would actually get the visa. So she went. And it was like an orientation of before you go type of thing. And she went and somebody sat there at the embassy and told them in the class, avoid black areas. They didn't say avoid poor neighborhoods. They said avoid black neighborhoods. But she moved to Atlanta. You got Cascade in Atlanta. You got black neighborhoods that are nice. They didn't tell her that. This was on African soil and they had the nerve to say this to her. She told me this in the 2010s. She said that to me. So I'm not going to sit up and defend the whites. No, they're the perfect scapegoat because they're guilty. I'm talking about as a society and as a system. The individuals, I know they differ naturally, like we do, but as a society, no, absolutely. They'll sit up and say stuff like this. Now, if they stopped doing it since then, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure. But at that point, that's what she was told. So they use a slang and dress style and everything else. But see, we got whites that'll do that, but they scared. They'll do that in their own neighborhoods to try to impress each other. But they ain't coming into certain zip codes and certain low-income areas of their own cities and trying that stuff. They don't want to get checked. So in all honesty, we got one group, one cultural group coming from one metro area on the continent, coming out of one country, that talks crap even about everybody else from the same nationality. And we sit up here now, we debating and we jumping down the Guyanese strokes, the Belizean strokes, the Jamaican strokes, the Trinidadian strokes, the Bahamian strokes. Trying to redefine our origin as being from the Americas, when in fact our origin is still from the continent. Even the Africans that they found that were here before Columbus, many of them came from the Mali Empire. Yeah, that's what would have wound up happening. Because Mansa Musa, who's famous, was only the Mansa, which means ruler or king in their language. He was only the Mansa because his older brother Abu Bakr II took a trip across the Atlantic. Didn't go far, came back, got more ships, departed a second time, never made it back. Later on, and y'all can check with Abdullah Hakim Quick about this. Later on, Abdullah Hakim Quick will tell you that evidence of them landing was found in what's now Brazil, Mexico, and part of the United States. And they left some writing, they left some inscriptions, they carved some messages into some stone. In Mandinka, they left these, talking about the elephants are tired and hungry. Elephants? How you gonna be looking at a rock in Mexico at a Mandingo inscription on some with Mandingo inscriptions on them, telling you that elephants are tired? Elephants don't live in the Americas naturally. You see where we're going? It's true, FBA doesn't, a lot of FBA don't sit up and say that they don't have any African roots. But it's in the same context as some who are trying to say that. They're talking about indigenous. There is an overlap and it's uncomfortable. Because you know how we never stop changing things. We're always changing. There's always something new, and it's usually not something intelligent. We can have conversations, cultural conversations with different groups about what's really going to work and what's not. And I can tell you that the Muslims are far ahead of the non-Muslims in that regard, because there's a common reference, and it's not just an Arab reference like many people want to say. If that was the case, and you all can go and check my my playlist, Redemption. One of my playlists on this channel is Redemption, and I got a list of videos that explain that. I added them a few days ago. No, Islam's not some Arab religion. It wasn't brought into Black Africa by force. They couldn't even do it. And one of the reasons I knew that was because an Egyptian back in 2000 told me they could have never invaded non-Saharan Africa. But in terms of like a way to, in terms of a way to be Black universally, with a code that could apply to a race, it's actually there in a code that was not designed to apply to specifically a race, but it winds up being, it winds up having that potential if we need it. Because let's be honest, again, when you're in Nigeria, Black's a physical description, but it's not an identity. The language your parents speak is an identity. Maybe you're mixed. But then that's two identities, unless you just default to your dad's identity. That's what you got back there. But the race becomes an identity when you leave. When other races go in, that's when the race becomes an identity. That's what wound up being the case. So if we have to have something for the race, well, I mean, that's why I told y'all that I already knew what the solution was. But in the meantime, we can have discussions about what's going to work and what's not going to work. But we also got to be very careful, because we like to make assumptions and not learn stuff. It is very true that a lot of times what we call passport Blacks, non-American Black folk, who come from a similar experience, from the Caribbean maybe, we'll look at them and we'll say, oh, see, well, they don't want to believe that racism is real. Okay, see, now you have a legitimate grudge. Well, they want to say, get rid of the victim mentality and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Okay, now you've got a legitimate grudge. But we need to be clear about something. We're talking to people who say that. We're not talking to someone that just happens to be Black, but goes to the U.S. on a non-U.S. passport with a U.S. visa attached to it. We're not talking about just the ones that migrated to the States. We're talking about the ones that talk that crap. And who's the one most likely to do it? Most likely. Because I ain't going to front. I've asked Somalis. Somalis tend to sympathize with us when it comes to a lot of things. They don't like our anti-intellectualism. But you know what? We in the manosphere don't like the anti-intellectualism of the Idnis class. So they agree with us in that. And they also sympathize in terms of what we've had to deal with from our own women, if we can even call them ours. Yeah, they sympathize. Ask an old man that question. He's older than me. Before he left his job, went back to the States. Ask him, what's the perception amongst your folks of African-American women? And he said, and it's the funny thing, he said, great friends to have, maybe great sisters to have, because they'll fight tooth and nail for you if you're on their side or if they're on your side. But it looks like they're hell on their husbands. I didn't have the heart to tell them that they actually hell on more than just their husbands, that they're hell on males in general. Didn't have the heart to tell them that. So there's a lot of sympathy. There's more sympathy than what we might think. You don't go to Nigeria and find the ones that hate you. You got to go specifically to Lagos. And when you go to Lagos, you're not going to find that the Edo has it in for you. And I'm saying that with a D. I don't know about the Yoruba. I don't think so. I know Akata is a Yoruba word, but I'm not sure if they have it in for us or not. I mean, the Yorubas I've met have been okay. But it's one particular cultural group, the ones that have the most recognizable names, and they're the ones that will say this stuff to you. They got problems with you right off the bat. But if you were Yoruba, they'd have problems with you. If you were Caribbean, they would have problems with you. If you were Edo, they'd have issues with you. Let alone if you're from the north, let alone if you're from Cameroon next door. It's one particular group, and we sit up here arguing with each other. Everybody else is now everybody else's throat because of that. And some of us don't even know how to properly describe it. We act like Black America is not the diaspora. We say Black America and then the diaspora. Father Mucker, Black America is part of the diaspora. Diaspora means that it's like a seed that has been spread out. The original location of anyone is not considered the diaspora. The Italian diaspora is in America, it's in Canada, it's in Australia, and it's in Argentina. Italy is not the Italian diaspora, dummy. Some people don't even have the vocabulary right. And they want to sit up here and preach. And I'm like, no, how about you fuck the shuck up? You don't even know the meanings of the terms you're using. That's ninja babble by definition. Well, you one of them diasporans. You African American, you a diasporan. That's what the name means. Well, no, I'm American. Okay, so you're gonna change the definition of the word diaspora because you American. Gonna make us all look stupid. And that's one of the things that happens. People associate Americans in general with a certain level of stupidity. So understand, some of what people believe about us has more to do with us being from the states with a U.S. passport than it has to do with the race. Some of that is just based on the nationality. I'll give you an example. Years ago in Morocco, 2015, I was getting ready to, I flew out. We got stuck in Egypt. I hate Egypt. Had to spend the night there. Didn't want to, couldn't stand it, wouldn't do it again. Somebody told me, here's a vacation to Egypt, it's free. I'd be like, man, there's only one part I'm willing to go to. If it's Cairo, I just as soon stick my junk out the window and pee over Cairo before I go visit it. Can't stand it. No, I don't hate the people, but I don't want to go to the country. It's too hectic, too much corruption. They're always on the take. And that's the thing. See, amongst Arabs, the Egyptians have the same reputation that the Nigerians have amongst, well, pretty much everybody else. And it's not fair to most of the Nigerians because they're not all from Lagos and they're not all scammers. But in Egypt, they're not all from Cairo or Alexandria and they're not all scammers. But they got that reputation. Well, when I was stuck there, we were being shuttled to the hotel. An Arab lady asked these Nigerian gentlemen next to us where they were from. And they said, from Nigeria. And she said, oh, Nairobi, Nigeria. She thought Nairobi was in Nigeria. And we all bust out laughing. Even I turned around laughing my behind off. I said to her, when we were done, she said, well, what's wrong? I spoke up and I said, ma'am, Nairobi is the capital of Kenya on the opposite side, south of here where we are. Nigeria's capital is Abuja. They're southwest of us right now. Ma'am, you qualify for an American passport. Would you like to trade with me? I think she had a Kuwaiti passport or something, one of them strong Gulf passports. So I said, would you like to trade with me? And they bust out laughing again. Because, see, we're the ones that are known for being geographically ignorant and stupid, not knowing where anything is. That's our reputation. As Americans, period, black or white. Some of it is just that. But the thing was that these guys, and I think they were Northerners too, the ones I saw on this bus going to the shuttle bus going to the hotel. These guys weren't dangerous to anybody. Didn't do anything to anyone, nothing. And as a matter of fact, we chopped it up for a little bit later before I went to my room, checked in. Because we had to wait in line to check in. We chopped it up for a little bit. I don't remember where they were from. but it was cool. And I understand the relationship between us is about more than just us getting along on a personal level. It is. But we also have to realize that you're going to have to get along with several individuals enough to learn about what they're dealing with and what they're going through. Because in all honesty, man, a lot of them are facing something similar. And here's the other thing I want to point out, and this is important before I get ready to go. Look, we're dealing with a situation in which we're not responsible for what the sisters do, because they ain't gonna listen to us no way. The only way we can get a sister to do anything is to tell them to do the opposite. And if she thinks that, if she knows that that's what you're trying to do, she's still gonna do what she wants. And she usually wants to do whatever's inconvenient for you. Crimson Cure, Red Film Diaries admitted as much. Melanie King is now admitting as much. And let's be honest, if Melanie King with her looks was 20 years younger and she was telling these secrets, they would have cut her throat by now. I mean, literally, she'd have been murked. Because the sisterhood would have gone after her. You too young and too fresh and too cute to be doing this. You messing it up for the rest of us. How dare you be honest and give up the playbook? See, that's what would have wound up happening. So just that same way that we're not responsible for what they do, because everything that they want to do is against us. In Nigeria, they're facing the same thing. When their ladies even leave some of these rural areas and go to Lagos, they might get turned out. Imagine if they leave the country and go to the States or the UK. They have said, some of these gentlemen have said that once these ladies go over there, you can't tell them nothing, because they can weaponize the system against you. They pointed this out before. They're not the only group that have pointed this out. I've had some men from Ethiopia tell me this years ago. They said that once some of their ladies leave and go stateside, they're lost. Some of them have even said, some families don't allow a daughter to migrate to the States until she's married to an Ethiopian. And if he can't get the visa, she don't go. Some of them have been that way because decades ago, they knew that she could be lost and would be. And so with that being said, if they're sitting up and saying that once she's going into the West, they're losing any influence over her, don't you think that explains why it is that you got I Am Eloho and For Harriet? Yeah, For Harriet. I just learned from Edward Anderson about an hour ago. I just learned from him that that's run by someone from Nigeria. And check out these names as well. When you got these ladies that are talking this crap in the States and dissing ADOS men as a collective, and by extension, dissing black men as a collective, when you got them doing this and you find out where they're from, look at the languages that their names come from. Go ahead and look. See what their names are and see what languages these names come from, or what language. You'll be shocked, but you'll see a pattern. You'll see it. And then you're going to, hopefully, when you see that, you'll start to ask yourself, if this is who's doing this, and they're doing this with their own men looking at them in shame or disgust, then why is it that we're sitting up here arguing about, why are we arguing with Hausas, Fulanis, Edo people, Ibibio, Benin, which is actually an ethnic group? Why are we arguing with them, let alone with the Beninese nationality or the Ghanaians or black folks from other parts of the Americas? Why are we arguing with them? Fighting over crumbs. Because if we're fighting over bones and crumbs, then who's eating the meat? Hopefully you'll ask yourself that question. Doesn't mean we're not going to have some discussions, but believe me, these discussions will be a lot easier and they will be a lot smoother. I promise you, they will be much easier and they will be much smoother. These discussions, if we understood exactly where the arguments are coming from. The arguments are largely coming from the women of one particular group in Lagos, by the way. The ethnic group is in different areas, but one particular group in Lagos that already looks at everybody else like they're fools and stupid. See, some of them back in the 80s, I remember some of them back in the 80s, although it was rare to meet someone from the continent where I lived when I was growing up. I remember some of them who would go to the schools there. Some of them. They didn't act this way in the 80s that much. Then again, I was a kid. Then I started hearing about how, I think it was when I went to college in Atlanta, some of the Liberians told me, man, you got to watch out for them Nigerians. And I was like, how's that possible? In a country of 250 million, how is it I got to watch out specifically for them? Because, I mean, maybe I do have to watch out for them, but then that means I got to watch out for you. I got to watch out for our Ghanaian brethren over there. Where's it going to stop? But then I ran across one at a job later, and he told me he was from a particular group that talks trash about everybody. But he told me his mother was Yoruba, and he used to talk trash about the Yoruba. And I said, what do you say about your mother then? And he said, I'll tell you that my mother's the one that told me these things about the Yoruba. But then he also said amongst his own people, his dad's people, that they just have a habit of talking trash. They don't actually mean anything by it. I told him, man, you can't be doing that with people you don't know. So I understand now that a lot of times y'all do this and y'all don't even have a grudge, but you can't be doing this with people you don't know. That doesn't work anywhere in the world. Forget about just Nigeria. It doesn't work. I don't think it works in Nigeria, man. You don't know someone and you start talking trash about them, but you cool with them. That's how you bond with someone, really? But he admitted to me that this was a problem amongst his folks. So a lot of times when they talking trash, they don't even mean it. How are we going to sit up and take that and use that as a reason to go and argue with all these other regions of the same country, let alone other nationalities, let alone people coming from outside of the continent? One thing I can say is this, though. I'm learning with some of them what they're going through in northern Nigeria, the good and the bad, because I'm willing to let them tell me. They're willing to listen when I explain some of what we've gone through in the Americas as a whole, and then by extension, the United States. More specifically, what I can say is that with most people in general, if you're willing to hear their story, they're willing to hear yours. And that's when you start to find these commonalities. I don't want to see a lot of us make the mistake of looking at someone who's black but not American and automatically assuming hostility and forgetting about who the real enemy is. Because I just sat up in here and told you multiple stories. I sat up and explained more than one story about how in Africa in general, you had these missionaries coming from outside of Africa, coming from outside of the black race and saying stuff to them, just like they were sitting up showing us the Tarzan movies. We've been played. We can sit up and scream ADOS like it's a gang all we want. It's a distinction, yes. FBA or ADOS, these are cultural distinctions, just like there are cultural distinctions in between the Ga and the Ewe people in Ghana, or the Bassa and the Kru people in Nigeria, in Liberia. Yeah, if the distinctions, that's fine. But what we got to understand is that we've been played against each other because someone's taken a distinction and used it as a division, and we bought it hook, line, and sinker again. Not because we're willing to discuss certain things, but because we're willing to entertain publicly distinctions and make them into grudges, divisions. I understand you got somebody in the NFL that's now wants to sue because he's facing discrimination. And previously, he would sit up and tell black folk from the United States, "Oh, get over it. Racism died a long time ago. It's not racism. You just a bunch of lazy N-words." That's a reason to go after him. But we should assume that he's a disgrace to even his own folks. Because understand, if you're telling somebody or something, if you're explaining what you've been through and they're listening, they may agree, they may not agree. But usually the one that disagrees is the one you're going to remember the most. But we make the mistake of thinking that because one person with a non-American passport but a U.S. visa and then later a green card told you to get over the victim mentality, that his people feel like this. No. Everybody ain't on code. There's no group of people in which everyone is on the same code. Not at all. And the thing is, we got to identify the ones that have a problem specifically. I would say as individuals, we need to identify who's got the issues with other black folks, including with black Americans, and zero in on them. We would need to go and zero in on those folks and stop talking about passport blacks as a category, as if all of them have the same mindset, because they don't. To be honest with you, even the generations don't always agree. They don't always agree. I mean, talking in the same household, they will not necessarily always agree. That doesn't mean the kid can tell dad, "Hey, dad, you're wrong," but they don't agree. And when the son gets older and moves out, he's not going to be part of that problem. That's the thing. This other thing that's got to be understood. There will be, there's going to be a split and a fight and a grudge, but we need to make this about ideology and not nationality. It's real simple. If somebody is going to sit up here and blame us for what someone else did to us, while that same group of people did something to them, then we look at that particular mindset, that individual and that mindset, and others like him or her with that mindset, and start calling them a bunch of sellouts. We don't sit up here and say that Jamaicans are sellouts. That's not fair. Just like it's not fair when they sit up and they say that African Americans are sellouts and want to be white Yankees or something like that, which a lot of them don't even say. But if they do, we wouldn't tolerate that, and we shouldn't. Because this is a family fight. We're fighting relatives. It's a sad situation, but that's what's going on. We fighting with relatives, and sometimes relatives have to go at it. But at least if you got to go at it with a relative, we got to go at it with the relative that is actually against the best interest of the family. And that's really all I'm trying to get at, based on ideology. And that's it. So, got to run an errand, gentlemen. I appreciate y'all tuning in. I'm not going to tell you all to do either of two extremes. I'm not going to tell you guys to not defend yourselves. Absolutely not. No, defend yourself. Defend your nationality. I'm also simply going to say, and I'm talking to, I'm only talking mostly African Americans right now because that's the bulk of my audience. Mostly, but I got some I'm going to say to some of these passport blacks, the ones that have these attitudes. First, let me address these two extremes. One, don't just not defend yourself. If someone does come along, call you a derogatory names, refer to you as lazy, or say something about your people being lazy, an intellectual discussion is one thing. But if they just come along and y'all are just lazy and you just want to complain, jump down their throat. But jump down his throat as a rat bastard sellout on an individual level or an ideological level. because that's in between one extreme of not defending yourself and the other extreme of counterattacking against his entire national category because of what he said. We can avoid these two extremes and take that middle path, and we jump down the throat of the sellout for selling out. And yes, exonerating white folks is selling out as far as I'm concerned. Not an individual, but exonerating their systems and nationalities. Yeah, that's selling out. You're going to let them off the hook for what they've done with I would have done the same thing. But then you're going to sit up here and you get the idea. Now, I'm going to say something to the ones that, I'm going to say something to anyone that wants to blame African Americans for what we've had to deal with in the United States. And by extension, I'm going to say something to the ones that we want to blame Black folks in the Americas in general. I'm going to say something to them too. If you think that what happened to the ones that got stolen from home was okay when they landed in the new world, if you think that it doesn't have an effect on today, if you think that they're somehow less than you because your ancestors ran a bit faster or your ancestors simply were safe, fortunately, or because your ancestors were actually involved in the traffic itself to make a profit. Now, I'm talking to those of you that talk down on Black folks in the New World, African American or Caribbeans or South Americans. If you're going to say this stuff, then frankly, you deserve to go through the same thing. Fair is fair, right is right, and just is just. You do not sit up and justify something happening to someone else, whether they're related to you or not, that you would not tolerate being done to you. You actually are the problem. If I sit up here, because I'm not going to tolerate this talk against Black Americans as a category. You can talk against the ethnics. I would join in because somebody's intentionally dysfunctional and negatively stereotypical. But then I understand this. When you want to sit up and talk about the one from the States, when we're done, I'm going to start going in and roasting the ones from your country too. Because every country's got ethnics. Not just every race, every country, every city, every neighborhood has ethnics. And we're going to go in on them too. And if you can't tolerate it, I might kick you in your chest. So if you want to sit up here and talk about some N-word robbed me at an ATM, I'm like, well, who are you calling an N-word? And then I'm going to talk about what somebody went through in your country. Because I know Black folk that have traveled to many a country. Some of them, some negative experience I can give you that my dad had. And when I start talking about that, I don't want to hear nothing about how I'm going in on your people. I got a bad back and terrible sinuses. I am not in fighting shape. And I might just go ahead and take that butt whooping. Because I may kick your chair out from under you or something. When you sit up here and try to insinuate that you got the right to talk down to us. No. We can trade insults if we're going to trade them and never trade a lick. The minute you tell me we're not supposed to defend ourselves, you talking to us like we're the white folks that did this stuff. Not just we're white folks, but like we're the ones who did these things. That's how you're talking. And we do it. We are supposed to be fighting back. But what I'm saying, African Americans or Black folks in Americas in general, is that we should be fighting back based on the ideology and not based on nationality. See, I noticed something years ago, I think it was about 2018. I pretended like I was recording something for this channel, and one of my colleagues of East African origin, U.S. citizenship, was sitting in my office, and then I closed out the recording. And I actually did it because he had said some things that were somewhat politically right-wing, but I didn't know how far he was. So this was a bait, actually. So I closed out the recording. He doesn't know about the channel. when I was done, he said, he actually let me finish the recording, and I was polite of him. But then when I was done, he said, "You got a victim mentality. You need to get rid of it." And that was the last time that we chatted. And I told him, first of all, sir, the victim mentality is right for a victim to have, just the understanding that one is a victim. And secondly, understand that your parents would not have wanted to migrate to the States if we hadn't done all this work for free. The opportunity that you get is because of the opportunities we earned and didn't get. Now, if you're not here to take advantage of us per se, you're not here to crap on us, then that's fine. You would have come over as a relative because you had to leave an unfortunate situation. But understand this, we haven't torn this country up the way that your folks tore up your country. And it wasn't but a few people tearing the country up, some of your folks, and making the rest have to run. Is it okay for me to blame you for what the ones did that tore the country up and forced you to leave? How about you fuck the shuck up? Get the hell up out of my office and don't come back with that mess. That was the last time we had to talk. But I had to be honest and fair and let him know that this was about what he said. This wasn't about his people, about him. If he doesn't know the history and he admits he doesn't know it, fine. Because see, another man, American citizen, but from the same origin, same nationality as him and his parents, he was the complete opposite. He jumped down a white Muslim's throat from Texas because the white Muslim, if you can even call him Muslim, said something about, "I don't care about what my ancestors did to the Native Americans and how they took over America. Now look at America as the greatest country in the world." And this other guy, same nationality as the right-wing Republican that sat in my office, I cut him off, jumped up and said, "Man, how about you fuck the shuck up? Because there's going to come a day when we can do this to you. And you're going to be the first one I'm going to put in chains and I'm going to work you to death." Talking about some, you don't care what they did to the Native Americans. Matter of fact, and he called him a disbelieving hypocrite kafir on the bus and dared him to do something. I wasn't there. I found out about this later on. And that's why I'm saying we need to start fighting. But I mean, yeah, African Americans are going to have to put a certain amount of loyalty in check, I should say, but we're going to have to be very clear that we're jumping on people because of their ideology. Just to make it fair, that's all. Anyway, I'm late running this errand. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate that. And as always, black heart, black mind, black out, assalamu alaikum, black heterosexual, non-select male power because they don't like it, and black patriarchy until extinction of judgment day.